My name is Lila Lawson. I'm 62 years old, and I restore old books for a living in a small workshop tucked behind a row of maple trees in Portland, Oregon. My hands know how to bring a torn spine back to life, how to stitch fragile paper with thread that will last another century. But nothing in my years of quiet labor prepared me for what happened on my son's wedding night. It was held at the Sentinel Hotel, a ballroom of chandeliers and perfect glassware. I remember the hum of the crowd, the rustle of dresses, the polished laughter that smelled like money and perfume. My son, Grant, stood tall at the head table, holding a champagne flute. He looked handsome, every inch the man he thought he had become. I waited for his toast, a mother's heart ready to burst with pride. And then he said it. "I'm ashamed of this family name." The microphone carried his voice across the room. For a moment, it was silent. Then someone laughed. Another joined. The laughter spread like spilled wine, staining everything it touched. My breath caught, but I didn't move. I didn't look away. I watched the bubbles rise in his glass, tiny and meaningless, until they vanished. The sound of laughter didn't break me. It pressed me still. I could feel Victor Pierce, his new father-in-law, smirking in the front row. His wife Lorraine lifted her phone, pretending to dab her eyes, while her screen glowed bright as she streamed it live. Sienna, my daughter-in-law, froze with her hands clasped, her smile trembling between shock and disbelief. People thought it was a joke, a performance. But I knew better. Shame wears many suits. Tonight, my son wore it as a crown. If you've ever stayed silent when the world expected you to react, you'll understand this part. The silence wasn't weakness. It was choosing to breathe before deciding what mattered most. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing for now. I didn't walk out. I didn't defend myself. I raised my glass, just a little, and met my son's eyes. He looked away first. The laughter softened, replaced by the clinking of forks against plates, the orchestra picking up a waltz. I sat down, smoothed the napkin over my lap, and let the moment settle like dust. You can learn a lot about people when you give them a moment to show who they are. That night, I didn't cry. I went home early, alone, and wrote 3 lines in my notebook. Some names are built. Some are borrowed. Only the built ones survive. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and listened to the faint echo of laughter still trapped in my ears. It wasn't the laughter itself that hurt. It was knowing my son believed every word he said. If you're watching this and wondering why a mother would let her own child humiliate her like that, stay. Because this story isn't about revenge. It's about something deeper, about what happens when dignity speaks without sound. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. And if you believe that silence can rebuild what pride has broken, you might want to follow along. What comes next changed not only his life, but mine. Later that night, as I cleaned the small champagne stain on my dress, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My hair had come loose, a few silver strands falling over my face. I brushed them back and smiled, not out of joy, but out of recognition. My father used to say, "A Lawson stands straighter when the wind is strongest." I whispered it back to the mirror, as if reminding both of us who we were. In the ballroom, they probably kept drinking. Lorraine would have posted the video, captioned with something smug, something about rebranding family pride. Sienna would have pretended not to see. Grant would have convinced himself it was harmless. The world moves fast when you think image is everything, but I know better. Books, like people, last because of what holds them together inside, not the cover. I set the dress to dry and opened my window. Portland's night air was cool, laced with rain. Somewhere in the distance, a train moaned along the tracks. I thought about my father's hands, the way he built ships in Maine, how he carved his name into the brass plaque at the shipyard. Ben Lawson, shipwright. That plaque had outlived him, outlived the storms. And maybe that was what hurt most. My son no longer believed our name meant anything worth keeping. I sat at my workbench. The scent of leather and wax steadied me. I picked up my knife, sharpened its edge, and began slicing through an old, torn spine. Each cut was clean, deliberate. Restoration begins with removing what's rotten. It felt right to work that night, to keep my hands busy while my heart sorted through the wreckage. The next morning, messages poured in. "Lila, did you see what Grant said? Are you okay?" I didn't reply. I made coffee, fed the stray cat that always waited by my door, and reread the 3 lines in my notebook. I didn't need to defend myself. The truth would come. In its own time. It always does. When I went to the mailbox, there was a parcel waiting. The label was faint, the handwriting familiar. "Return to sender," it read. "Estate of Benjamin Lawson." My breath caught. My father had been gone for years, yet here was something returning to me in his name. I carried it inside carefully, placed it on the table, and just looked at it. I didn't open it yet. Some things deserve silence before touch. I didn't know it then, but inside that package lay the first thread of everything that would follow. The quiet revenge, the redemption, the truth. My son thought he had buried our name that night. What he didn't know was that I was already preparing to bring it home again. I didn't open the parcel right away. I set it on the work table beside the steel ruler engraved LL and turned on the small lamp. Silence is a tool. It lets me see what noise hides. The knife lay where I leave it, wrapped in linen, blade oiled. I unrolled it like a promise. The edge caught the light. I drew the whetstone toward me. Slow passes. Stone, blade, stone. Some spines bend too easily. A good edge never apologizes for doing its work. I warmed beeswax between my fingers and fed the thread. It drank and obeyed. I could almost hear my father, patient as tide, telling me to keep the angle right, to pull just enough, never more. He believed a name was a straight line pressed true. You hold it, you measure by it, and you don't pretend. My phone buzzed. Lorraine had posted a bright clip from the wedding. Her caption read, "New beginnings." I watched it once without sound. That was enough. I set the phone face down under a stack of boards. Some things don't deserve another minute of light. I turned to the parcel. The handwriting was my father's, but older, as if time had shaken his lines. "Return to sender. Estate of Benjamin Lawson." My name sat beneath it. I traced the letters with my knuckle and felt a hitch in my chest. I thought of Camden Harbor and the brass plaque that never moved even when winter hit hard. I made tea. I carried the cup back to the bench and opened my ledger. 3 lines from last night waited on the left margin. Some names are built, some are borrowed. Only the built ones survive. I added a 4th line. Hold your line. Even when laughter leans. An email chimed. The subject read, "Regarding estate matters." It was from Harper. Her note was measured as always. She had attached a scan. A receipt stub made out to Lawson Youth Literacy Fund. I smiled. The fund was mine in practice, his in spirit. My father sent small checks under odd names, just enough to keep it alive without attention. The stub showed a donation larger than any I had seen. Her message added a meeting time and a question about parcels. I answered simply, "Yes, it's here, unopened." I pulled a battered book from the pile, a family Bible with a broken back and brittle edges. I opened it gently and watched dust lift like memory. Restoration begins where a thing is honest. I cut the tired threads, lifted the text block, and scraped the old glue from the spine until the paper breathed again. My hands moved without hurry. The knife slid clean. The waxed thread hummed through fresh holes. You can't stitch pride with borrowed thread. Outside, someone laughed on the sidewalk. It faded before the stitch pulled through. There is a difference between laughter that heals and laughter that wounds. One lands soft, the other slices. I let the thought pass. The paper wanted my attention more than the past. When the spine was ready for new cloth, I chose a strip dyed deep harbor blue. I pressed paste thin as truth, laid the cloth down, smoothed the bubbles with the steel ruler, and felt the surface settle. By the time the cloth set, my breath had set too. I faced the parcel again. I slid the knife under the first seam of tape, careful and square. The paper gave with a whisper. Inside was a wooden box, simple pine rubbed smooth, corners joined by hands that knew the difference between almost and right. On the lid, burned into the grain, were his initials. B.L. I didn't open it yet. I held the box and counted to 10, then 20, then 30. I placed it down and stepped back. Not from fear, but to meet it with steadiness. I wiped the bench, set the box in the center, and turned the lamp brighter. The phone buzzed again. A message from Sienna blinked. "Are you home?" "I'm sorry about last night." Another pause. "He isn't himself around them." I typed and deleted. Typed again. "I'm home?" I left it there. Sometimes a door can stay cracked without opening. I lifted the lid. The hinges creaked, polite as old floorboards. Inside lay a steel ruler wrapped in cloth, heavy and familiar. LL was stamped near the inch mark. Mine, once. I had given it to my father when I left Maine for Oregon, telling him I needed new measures. He smiled and said I would be back for the old ones when the time was right. Beneath the ruler was a sealed envelope with my name. I didn't open that either. Not yet. There was another item under the envelope. A folded check to the Literacy Fund, signed in my father's hand with a small note. "For hands that will need steadiness." I pressed my thumb over the ink and felt the ache of how he planned for what he would not see. I closed the box and drew it close like a book I wasn't ready to finish. I set the Bible to dry under weights and cleaned the knife. Linen around the blade, oil along the edge. The workday ended itself, as good work does. I turned off the lamp and let the room hold its breath. Before bed, I wrote a single line and tucked it beneath the lid of the box. When you measure, be honest. In the morning, I would carry the box and the envelope to Harper. Tonight, I would keep the silence steady enough to get us there. Tonight. I washed my cup, locked the door, and stood in the dark listening. A train called toward the coast. I pictured Camden's harbor, the brass plaque, the cold air. I whispered into the dark like a promise. I will bring the name home. The morning air smelled of rain and cedar. Portland always carries a kind of quiet after the storm, like the city itself is waiting for you to decide who you'll be today. I packed the wooden box carefully into my bag, tucked the envelope beside it, and headed downtown to Harper's office. She had been my lawyer since my father's estate first passed through probate 15 years ago. Back then, we only met to sign papers and trade polite words. Today felt different. Today, something waited. Her office sat above a bakery that smelled of butter and thyme. I pressed the elevator button and watched the floor numbers rise slow, as if thinking about it. When the door opened, Harper greeted me with that same calm voice that could make even bad news sound manageable. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, glasses perched halfway down her nose. "Lila," she said, "you brought it." I nodded and placed the box on her desk. She opened it as if handling something sacred. "Benjamin Lawson," she murmured. He always found a way to keep one more surprise. She reached for a file folder already waiting beside her laptop. "Before we open the letter, there's something else. The court finally cleared the estate extension. It seems your father set up a conditional clause we didn't know about. It references the living heirs of the Lawson name. You and Grant are listed." I felt the room tighten. "Conditional?" I asked. She nodded and slid the document forward. "It's a full inheritance clause. The assets total $12.8 million, but there's a condition written in his own words. You'll want to read this." Her finger traced a paragraph typed on yellowed paper. I read slowly, letting each word sink deep. "The name Lawson shall not pass to those who abandon it in shame. Inheritance is not of money, but of honor. Only those who uphold the name may claim its trust." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Harper looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "He knew," she said quietly. "He must have known something like this could happen." I thought of Grant's voice at the wedding, the laughter, the cameras. I thought of the champagne glass shaking slightly in his hand. He didn't just wound me. He wounded the man whose name built the foundation he stood on. "When do we read it?" I asked. 3 days from now," she said. "All heirs must be present. You, Grant, and Sienna have already been notified." 3 days. That number pressed against me like fate repeating itself. I remembered the tagline of my own humiliation. 3 days later, my lawyer read his grandfather's will. Now it wasn't a prophecy. It was a plan. I opened the letter my father had left inside the box. The paper was soft with age. The ink faded but certain. "Lila, if this reaches you, the time has come to remind our blood what it means to build with hands instead of words. Honor the name, even if others forget." He signed it simply, "Dad." I closed the letter and set it beside the legal copy. Harper leaned forward. He attached supporting documentation, letters from a genealogist, tax records, old donation receipts. He'd been tracking the family line for years. It's as if he wanted to make sure the name never disappeared. The rain began against the window, soft and even. "He was always measuring things," I said. "Ships, boards, people. He believed what you build outlasts what you say." Harper smiled faintly. "He built this too, a clause that defends dignity." Her phone rang. She answered quickly, then handed it to me. "It's Grant." I took a slow breath and pressed it to my ear. His voice came through tight, clipped. "Mom, I heard about the will. Is this some kind of joke?" "No," I said. "They said there's a condition, that I have to honor the name. What does that even mean?" "You'll hear it when Harper reads it." He laughed, short and bitter. "So this is about the wedding, isn't it? You're still angry." "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm careful." The line went quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean—" "You did," I said softly. "And now, you'll have to mean something else." He exhaled sharply. "Fine. I'll be there." When I handed the phone back, Harper studied me. "You kept your voice steady," she said. "It's easier when you've already been broken once," I replied. "The cracks know where to go." She looked down at the documents. "This clause might be more than symbolic, Lila. If he fails to meet it, The inheritance reverts to the Lawson Hands Foundation your father registered years ago. You're its listed trustee. I blinked. The foundation exists? It does now, she said. Your father's accountant reactivated it months before he passed. He must have wanted the wealth to serve labor, not pride. I touched the edge of the steel ruler on the desk. Its weight steadied me. My father had planned not for control, but for teaching. Even in death, he was still correcting our lines. As I left Harper's office, the rain eased into a fine mist. I walked past the bakery, the scent of bread and sugar mixing with the cold air. A man held the door for me and smiled. I smiled back. Small courtesies matter. They build the world back piece by piece. At home, I placed the letter beside the Bible I had restored. 2 books now carried the same spine of truth. I cleaned my knife, folded the cloth over it, and wrote again in my notebook. A name is not inherited. It's practiced. The days that followed were a blur of small details, calls from Sienna, messages from people pretending concern. I ignored most of them. I spent the time preparing, not my speech, not my defense, but my steadiness. Dignity needs no rehearsal. On the morning of the 3rd day, I dressed simply and packed the wooden box once more. The steel ruler went into my bag. As I locked the door, I caught my reflection in the glass. For a moment, I saw my father behind me, measuring the line of my shoulders. He nodded once, as if to say, "Keep it straight." The courthouse was full of echoes. Grant arrived late, Sienna by his side. Harper motioned us to the table where the papers lay. The clerk read the introduction. Then Harper began the formal reading of the will. Her voice was clear. To my daughter, Lila, and to her son, Grant, I leave equal shares of my estate. However, this inheritance shall pass only to those who bear the Lawson name with honor. Any heir who abandons the name or shames it in public forfeits all rights. The remainder shall fund the Lawson Hands Foundation to support craftsmen who labor with integrity. Grant's face drained of color. Sienna looked down, fingers trembling. The room went silent, as if even the walls respected the moment. Harper folded the final page and said quietly, "Your father left you more than money, Lila. He left you a mirror." Grant turned to me, his mouth open but empty of words. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence between us measured everything that had gone wrong, and everything that could still be rebuilt. Grant didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after the will reading. Silence can be sharp when it comes from guilt. I didn't chase it. I've learned that when someone turns away, it's better to give them a mirror than a map. They'll find their own way when they're ready to see. I kept working. The books didn't care about family pride or public shame. They just needed attention. Hand steady, thread even, glue thin. Life feels easier when measured in quiet tasks. But the world outside the workshop has its own noise, and that noise eventually finds you. One afternoon, while the rain whispered against the window, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Lawson," a voice said smoothly. "This is Victor Pierce. I'd like a word." His tone was the same polished arrogance that filled that wedding hall. The kind of voice that could charm investors and insult workers in the same breath. "About your son," he continued, "and a few opportunities I think would be mutually beneficial." I almost laughed. "Opportunities?" I repeated. "Is that what we're calling them now?" He ignored the edge in my voice. Grant's career could use a little help after that unfortunate incident. Some people are nervous about the will's conditions. Names matter, you know. He paused for effect. But brands matter more. He asked to meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Curiosity is sometimes the best way to learn how deep the rot goes. The cafe was sleek and cold, all glass and marble. Victor arrived in a charcoal suit that looked freshly pressed by ambition itself. He smiled like a man shaking hands with a problem he intended to solve. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, "I'm sure we both want what's best for Grant." "What I want," I said, "is for my son to remember where he came from." He waved a hand dismissively. "That's sentimental. We're in an age of presentation. A man is what the world sees, not what he remembers." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were mock-ups of a digital campaign. Rebrand the Lawsons. New logo, new tagline, clean, modern, detached from anything that smelled of sweat or labor. "This," he said, "is how you survive in today's market. You can't cling to the old shipyard image forever. Let me help you build a new identity, one that sells." I closed the folder and looked him straight in the eye. "We don't sell our name, Mr. Pierce. We earn it." He smirked. "That kind of pride doesn't pay bills." I stood up. "It built ships that outlived storms. I think it's paid enough." He chuckled under his breath. "That explains why your son is struggling to move forward." "Struggling?" I said quietly. "Or learning?" He didn't answer. I left him sitting there with his glossy folder and his empty confidence. On the way home, I saw Grant's face on a billboard ad for a real estate firm. Smiling, polished, captioned with his new tagline, "Grant Pierce, Integrity for Tomorrow." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He had taken his wife's last name. When I got home, I sat in the workshop, staring at the half-bound book on my bench. The threads waited, patient. I picked up the knife, felt its balance, and cut through the next section of cloth. A single motion, clean, decisive. You can't rebind something that refuses to keep its spine. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Cole Ramirez, the investigator Harper sometimes hired. "You might want to see this," he wrote. Attached were screenshots, email drafts between Victor's PR firm and several online outlets. They planned a campaign framing the Lawsons as a cautionary tale of outdated values. The plan was to spin the humiliation at the wedding into an inspirational brand story for Grant's consulting business. A man rises above his humble beginnings, they called it. Humble. That word burned. Cole's note beneath the images read, "They're paying 6 figures for placement. I can trace the billing if you want." I didn't reply right away. I read the emails twice, then turned off my phone. Some fires are better studied before they're put out. I needed to see how far they would spread. The next day, an invitation arrived in the mail. It was for an upcoming networking gala, the Pierce Group's annual fundraiser. My name wasn't on the list. Instead, the envelope read, "To Mr. and Mrs. Grant Pierce." My hands didn't shake when I opened it. Disappointment becomes quieter with repetition. In the following weeks, the campaign began to unfold online. Articles appeared, photos edited, captions rehearsed. From blue-collar roots to boardroom success. They made him sound like a self-made man who had overcome the burden of family shame. My workshop was mentioned once in passing as a symbol of the modest past he's learned from. I recognized Lorraine's writing style immediately. She'd always loved storytelling, especially when she was the author. I didn't fight it, not publicly. I just worked. Each night, when I tied off the last thread, I imagined tying off the lies one by one. Silence is not surrender, it's sharpening. Cole called a week later. "I've got what you need. Proof of payment, Invoices, fake accounts, all of it leads back to Victor. Keep it safe, I told him. Not yet. Harper came by the workshop soon after. She saw the fatigue in my eyes and didn't ask about it. He's making noise, she said. But noise fades. Truth doesn't. I smiled faintly. My father used to say the same thing about waves. When she left, I opened my notebook and wrote in the corner, "If they want to rebrand the name, let them. I'll rebuild it." Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady, the sound of something washing clean what pride had stained. I picked up the ruler, ran my thumb along the groove of the letters LL, and whispered to the empty room, "We don't erase, we restore." That night, as the city lights flickered through my window, I saw Grant's face again on a screen. Another interview, another polished answer. I studied his expression. Somewhere beneath that perfect smile was a boy who once watched me mend torn pages by hand. He had forgotten what the work felt like. But forgetting isn't forever. The truth, like thread, always waits to be pulled tight again. The package from Maine arrived 3 days after the rain stopped. The postmark read Camden, the town where I was born and where my father built ships until his hands gave out. The handwriting was my sister May's, deliberate, sturdy, a reflection of the woman herself. Inside was a short note. "Come home. There's something you should see." I stared at it for a long time before booking the train. Some invitations don't need questions. They already carry the answer. The train ride north felt like traveling backward through time. Forests blurred into salt marshes and the air turned sharper, briny, familiar. When the train slowed near the harbor, I caught sight of the water, gray and restless. The shipyard cranes were smaller now, replaced by glass condos and banners for the summer regatta. But the scent, the mix of tar, wood, and sea, was the same one that once clung to my father's coat. That scent still meant home. May met me at the platform. She looked older, her silver hair gathered under a red scarf, her eyes warm but cautious. We hadn't spoken much since our father's funeral. Grief has a way of folding people into corners of silence they forget how to leave. "You look like him," she said softly as we hugged. "More every year." She drove us through narrow streets lined with maples and clapboard houses until we reached her porch. The old house stood just as I remembered, though the paint had faded and the railing leaned slightly to one side. Inside, the air carried the faint smell of cedar and salt. A kettle whistled on the stove, and the window by the sink framed the gray Atlantic. "I found something," May said, setting 2 mugs on the table. "It was in the attic with Dad's papers. I think it's meant for you." She handed me a small wooden chest, older than the one I'd received weeks earlier. Its hinges were rusted, the lid carved with our father's initials and a single word: measure. Inside, wrapped in linen, lay an old steel ruler, the twin of the one I kept in Portland. Along its edge were faint scratches, like marks left from years of work. The initials LL were etched near the end, the same letters I'd carved into my first ruler as a teenager. He had kept it. I ran my thumb along the cool metal and felt something close to reverence. "There's more," May said. She handed me a stack of envelopes tied with twine. The top one was addressed to me in my father's hand, postmarked 15 years earlier but never sent. "He left them in my care," she said. "Said to give them to you when the world felt too loud." I untied the string and opened the first letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. "Lila," it began. "You left home to find your own measure. If you ever doubt what that means, remember, you can't measure a man by what he earns, only by what he builds and what he keeps straight. I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of his words. Each one was an anchor pulling me back to something steady. May poured the tea and watched me with a quiet smile. "He was proud of you," she said. "He used to send small donations in your name, anonymous, of course. He said if you ever found out, you'd make it mean something bigger." My throat tightened. "The checks to the literacy fund," I whispered. "They were from him." May nodded. "He wanted Grant to know where that came from one day. Said pride should be inherited through example, not inheritance." The window rattled as a gust of wind hit the house. Outside, the tide was rolling in, the harbor shifting from steel to silver. I thought of the plaque that still hung on the shipyard gate. Ben Lawson, shipwright. It wasn't just a name. It was a statement carved into brass and salt air, a promise that work done with integrity lasts longer than applause. May reached across the table and touched my hand. "You've carried his steadiness, Lila, even when you didn't think you had it." I looked at her, the sister who had stayed when I left. "Maybe I just borrowed it for a while," I said. We spent the afternoon sorting through old letters and ledgers, the house filled with the rhythm of turning pages and the quiet comfort of shared memory. Among the papers was a small envelope addressed to Grant. I hesitated, tracing the ink. "You should give it to him," May said. "Whatever it is, it's time." I slipped the envelope into my bag beside the ruler. The metal clinked softly, like a reminder. Some lessons wait until you're ready to pass them on. As the sky turned orange over the harbor, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, the air crisp and smelling of pine. May told stories about our father, how he refused to cut corners even when the client begged him to hurry, how he taught apprentices to sand until their arms ached, how he'd say, "If it isn't straight, it isn't honest." Each story felt like a stitch repairing something frayed inside me. When the stars began to appear, May stood and hugged me tightly. "Don't let them take the name," she whispered. "It's not theirs to rebrand." "I won't," I said. On the train back to Portland, I kept the ruler in my lap. Each mark along its edge told a story: the rise and fall of ships, the measure of boards, the patience of a craftsman who believed perfection wasn't in what you built, but how you built it. I thought about Grant, about the way he erased his name online, about Victor's smooth voice calling shame progress. I felt anger, but underneath it was something stronger, a calm resolve that comes when you know the truth is heavier than the lie. By the time I reached my stop, the city was wrapped in fog. I carried the box and letters home, set them on my work table, and opened my notebook. Some names are measured twice, once by the world, once by the hands that built them. I closed the cover and turned off the light. Tomorrow, I would visit Harper. There were things to sign, and one letter to deliver. The storm was gathering its shape again, but this time, I was ready to stand in it. The morning began with a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, Grant stood there, his shoulders hunched beneath a coat too fine for the drizzle. His eyes were tired, his confidence thinned around the edges. It had been weeks since we last spoke. I stepped aside without a word, letting him in. He looked around the workshop as though it were a foreign place, though he had spent half his childhood here watching me mend old bindings. He lingered near the table, tracing the edge of a finished book. "You're still doing this," he said quietly. "I am," I answered. "Books don't shame their names." He exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I need your help. Just $15,000. It's not much. Temporary." He hesitated before adding, "I'll pay you back when my new contract clears." I looked at him for a long time. The man standing before me had traded his name for access, his integrity for applause. "What do you need the money for?" I asked. "Business expenses," he said quickly. "Travel, networking, just a few gaps." Victor said it's standard. "Victor Pierce," I said, tasting the name like metal. "The man who taught you that shame can be profitable." He winced. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm just keeping the ledger honest." He ran a hand through his hair. "You have the money, Mom. You inherited enough from Granddad. I'm just asking for a little help." "The inheritance," I said softly, "comes with a condition. You know that." He looked at me sharply. "You're not really going to hold that over me?" "I'm not holding anything over you. I'm holding something up for you to see." He turned away, pacing. "Victor says, the clause is symbolic. He says it's just your father's old-fashioned way of guilt-tripping us. It doesn't mean anything legally." I took a breath, steady and low. "Then why are you so afraid of it?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. "Because it's unfair," he muttered. "You think one mistake erases everything I've built?" "One mistake can reveal what was never built at all," I said. "The clause isn't about punishment. It's about proof." His voice cracked. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "I do," I said. "I've lived under heavier ones." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I watched the conflict rise behind his eyes. Finally, he said, "So you won't help me?" "I already did," I said. "I raised you." He stared at me as though the words struck deeper than he expected. "You're really choosing pride over family?" "No," I said. "I'm choosing family through pride." He looked like he might say something more, but instead he shoved the paper into his pocket and turned toward the door. "You'll regret this," he said. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll regret it standing straight." After he left, the workshop felt different, emptier, colder. I sat at the bench, staring at the steel ruler beside my knife. $15,000. To him, it was nothing but leverage. To me, it was the exact measure of a line that couldn't be crossed. The phone rang that afternoon. Harper's voice was brisk but calm. "Lila, I received a notification from Grant's firm. He's been placed on probation for performance issues. There's mention of irregular expenses, KPI discrepancies. It's getting messy." I sighed. "He asked me for money this morning." "Then you made the right call," she said. "Sometimes the clean answer hurts more than the dirty offer." I smiled faintly at her phrasing. "That's going in my book of lessons." She chuckled. "Just keep your receipts, Lila. The world's about to test your patience." When the call ended, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Integrity is a loan only you can repay." I underlined it twice. Evening came with the smell of rain again. I worked late, sewing the spine of a travel journal from 1912, its pages filled with the handwriting of a man who wrote every day about weather and waves. His words were steady, never dramatic. That's what I admired about old diaries. They told the truth without demanding to be heard. I thought about how my son's life had become the opposite. All noise, no weight. Around midnight, a message from Sienna appeared on my phone. "I'm sorry about earlier. He's lost. I don't know how to reach him anymore." I typed back, "Sometimes you can't reach someone until they stop running." She replied with a single word, "Thank you." I put the phone down and returned to the workbench. The knife caught the light. I drew it slowly along a strip of paper, listening to the clean hiss as it cut. Truth feels like that sound. Sharp, precise, unforgiving, but honest. Before I closed for the night, I pulled out the letter from May and reread my father's handwriting. You can't measure a man by what he earns, only by what he keeps straight. My eyes lingered on the word straight. It was more than geometry. It was integrity in motion. I touched the ruler, felt its cool certainty beneath my fingers, and whispered, I'm still keeping it straight, Dad. Outside, the city was quiet. Somewhere, Grant was probably sitting in a high-rise apartment with too much light and not enough peace. I wondered if he still remembered the smell of this workshop, the sound of thread pulling through cloth, the rhythm of work that never lied. He would, one day. People always do, once the noise falls away. I cleaned the knife, wrapped it in its linen, and placed it beside the ruler. My hand smelled of wax and patience. Some nights end without victory, but not without meaning. I turned off the light and let the silence finish what words could not. The morning light filtered through the narrow window of my workshop, turning the dust in the air into floating silver. It was the kind of quiet morning that invites decisions. I brewed coffee, opened my notebook, and wrote the words I had avoided for weeks. Lawson Hands Foundation. I stared at the letters until they felt real again. My father had built ships with his hands. I would rebuild dignity with mine. Harper arrived at 9, punctual as always, carrying 2 folders and a look that meant business. I've prepared the paperwork, she said. We'll need a registered board, a mission statement, and an anonymous donor identity for now. If the foundation is public too soon, it could attract the wrong kind of attention. I nodded. Then we'll let the work speak before the world does. She smiled. That sounds exactly like you. We spent the next few hours drafting the legal structure. The foundation would provide small grants and apprenticeships for young tradespeople, bookbinders, carpenters, shipwrights, anyone who built with honesty. It would operate under a simple creed. To honor work is to honor the name. Darnell Brooks, president of the Portland Craftworkers Union, agreed to join the board. He was a big man with gentle eyes and calloused palms, the kind of person who shook hands like every deal mattered. Your father would have liked this, he said. He always said there's no shame in work, only in pretending you're above it. I smiled. That's exactly what we're repairing. Darnell introduced me to a young apprentice named Tommy Reyes, 19 years old, quiet but sharp. His scholarship application had been buried under a pile of rejected forms. He told me he'd been saving to buy his own tools. I just want to build something that lasts, he said. I handed him one of my old rulers, not the LL, but a simpler one. Then start with straight lines, I said. His grin reminded me of Grant at that age, before ambition turned brittle. Later, Harper helped me finalize the anonymous donor setup. The foundation would quietly receive its first deposit from an undisclosed account. The funds redirected from my portion of the inheritance until Grant's eligibility was settled. You're giving away what might all end up yours, Harper said softly. Are you sure? Yes, I said. It already is mine, if it's used right. By evening, the paperwork was filed. Darnell organized a small press release. Nothing flashy, just a notice in the local paper about a new community initiative supporting young artisans. The photo showed only hands at work, wax thread glinting under light. My name didn't appear anywhere, and that was the point. Silence builds truer walls than applause. A few days later, Tommy visited my workshop to thank me. He brought a half-bound notebook, the stitches uneven but sincere. I used your pattern, he said proudly. I examined it carefully, then handed it back. Keep practicing, I told him. Straight lines take time. He nodded, cheeks red, and left with a promise to do better. When he was gone, I looked around the room. It felt fuller somehow, not with people, but with purpose. Every sound, every scrape of the knife, every draw of the thread felt like a heartbeat for something larger than myself. My father had built ships for men who would never know his name. I was building something for hands that hadn't yet learned their worth. Then the first ripple reached me. Lorraine's post appeared on social media that night. Rumor says someone's funding a nostalgia project for factory workers. Cute. The picture beneath showed Grant at a charity dinner, glass raised, captioned, "Moving forward, not backward." Her words were meant to sting, but I only felt pity. People who fear work always mock it first. I scrolled through the comments, laughing emojis, shallow praise, nothing that would matter when truth arrived. I turned off my phone. Darnell had warned me this might happen. Every good deed threatens someone who profits from vanity, he'd said. He was right. Cole called the next day. Victor's digging, he told me. He suspects you're behind the foundation. Let him dig, I said. Some holes collapse on their own. Harper visited again with an envelope of thank you letters from the first group of apprentices. Their handwriting was clumsy, their gratitude raw. One line from Tommy stood out. This is the first time I've been trusted to make something worth keeping. I ran my fingers over the words until the ink smudged slightly. I understood that kind of salvation. That night, I lit a single lamp in the workshop and began restoring a rare binding, a 19th century poetry volume with gold leaf edges. As I worked, I thought of Grant somewhere, in his glass office, surrounded by screens and numbers. He believed dignity was measured by success. I wanted to show him it was measured by service. When I finished, I opened my notebook and wrote, "What you give quietly will outlast what others shout." I pressed the page flat with my palm. The wax thread on the desk glowed faintly under the lamp. I smiled. The foundation was breathing now, slow and steady, like the start of a tide turning. As I locked up for the night, I paused by the window. Across the street, the reflection of my workshop lights shimmered on wet pavement. It looked like two worlds, one above, one below, both holding the same quiet truth. Work done with love reflects itself. I whispered into the darkness. This is how we rebuild the name. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. It was unmarked, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a single line written by Victor Pierce. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Lawson." I folded the note, tore it clean down the middle, and dropped it into the trash. The phone rang a minute later. It was Harper. "He's starting to panic," she said. "His firm's PR invoices are being reviewed. Cole found something." I smiled to myself. Then let's see what happens when lies meet daylight. The day began with a knock that carried purpose. Cole stood outside my door, his coat dripping with rain, a folder tucked under his arm. His expression was calm but certain, the look of a man who has finally found what others hoped would stay buried. "It's all here," he said, stepping inside. "Invoices, transfers, fake vendor accounts, every dollar Victor spent trying to rewrite history." I cleared a space on the work table. He opened the folder and spread out the documents. Each page was stamped and signed, everyone a thread in a web of deceit. Payments from Pierce Holdings to a PR firm in Los Angeles, the same firm behind the online campaign that turned my family into a headline. He paid $600,000, Cole said, tapping the last page, to make you small and him large. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger. 600,000 to erase a name, I said quietly. He should have invested in honesty. It's cheaper and lasts longer. Harper arrived soon after. Her umbrella was still wet, her voice steady. "We're ready," she said. "I've drafted a letter to Victor's legal department. We'll give him 48 hours to retract every false claim or face litigation under defamation and fraudulent use of likeness. The media trail is traceable, and the IRS will want to know why charitable grants were redirected to vanity projects." I looked at her, then at Cole. "Let's not threaten. Let's remind." I took a clean sheet of paper and began writing a single line by hand. Every story you build on lies eventually collapses under the weight of truth. Beneath it, I signed, L.L. Harper, smiled faintly. Classic Lila. By afternoon, the letters were sent. Harper's tone in her cover note was precise and surgical, leaving no room for denial. Cole had already forwarded copies of the invoices to an anonymous journalist he trusted. "He won't know where it's coming from," Cole said. "But he'll know it's over." The next morning, Portland woke to headlines. Real estate mogul's PR scandal exposed. The story spread quickly. Bank records, internal emails, falsified statements, all tied to Victor Pierce. The same media outlets that once echoed his arrogance now dissected his deceit. By noon, his company issued a statement, suspending operations pending audit. The sound of silence that followed was louder than any apology. That evening, Darnell organized a press conference at the community center, not to celebrate Victor's fall, but to uplift what he tried to bury. The Lawson Hands Foundation presented its first public award to local craftsmen, honoring the dignity of work and the courage to stay true. I stood in the back, unseen, watching Tommy step onto the stage with a nervous smile. He spoke into the microphone, voice trembling but proud. "My father always said your name follows your hands. Make sure they're clean when you're done." The room filled with applause. Not the hollow kind that fades when cameras leave, but the warm kind that fills the lungs and lingers. Harper caught my eye from across the hall. She knew I had written that speech. She also knew I wanted no credit. The point was never to win. It was to balance the scales. After the event, I walked home through streets that smelled of rain and newsprint. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Messages from acquaintances, congratulations from people who once stayed silent. I ignored them all. Justice isn't a headline, it's a mirror. When you look into it, you should see your work, not your name. That night, I sat in the workshop, the steel ruler beside me. I thought about Victor, about how pride and fear are often the same shape in different hands. Somewhere across town, he was likely pacing his glass office, watching everything he'd built crumble under the truth he tried to hide. He would call it unfair. Men like him always do. A soft knock broke the quiet. It was Grant. He stepped inside hesitantly, his suit soaked, his eyes heavy. "I saw the news," he said. "Victor's finished." "Finished men usually start by finishing themselves," I said. "Sit down." He did. His hands shook slightly. "Did you do it?" "I revealed what was already there," I said. "Nothing more." He looked down. "He said it was just business. That's what he told me." "Business doesn't have to mean betrayal," I replied. "You chose to trust him because it was easier than trusting your conscience." He flinched, then nodded slowly. You're right." The admission hung in the air like a fragile thread. For the first time, I saw something break open in him. Not arrogance, not denial, but exhaustion. "I didn't know how to stop," he whispered. "Every time I tried to fix it, it got worse." I poured him tea, the same way I had when he was a boy after scraping his knees. "You stop by being still," I said. "You fix it by starting over." He stared into his cup. "Can that even happen?" "It already is," I said. "The truth works quietly." He nodded, and for a moment, he looked more like my son than the man who had raised a glass against his own blood. He left without another word, shoulders lighter than when he came. Later that night, Harper called. "Victor's withdrawn his media contracts," she said. "He's disappearing from the news cycle. The story's shifting. People are talking about the foundation instead. Darnell wants to name the next event after your father." I smiled into the dark. "Tell him to call it something simple. Something like Hands That Build." That's all he ever wanted. When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair. The lamp threw soft light across the workbench, catching on the ruler's edge. The reflection looked like a horizon, a line between what was done and what was yet to come. I picked up my pen and wrote in my notebook, "Truth costs time, not vengeance. Pay it patiently." I closed the cover, set it aside, and breathed. Outside, the city was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows balance restored. Somewhere in that silence, I could almost hear my father's voice, low and steady. "Keep it straight, Lila, always." The rain returned the next afternoon, gentle at first, then steady, washing the streets clean of yesterday's noise. I sat by the window with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, watching the drops thread down the glass like tiny stitches. I had learned to love the sound. It reminded me that even storms had rhythm. That's when the message came from Sienna. "Can we talk? Just the two of us." I answered with 3 words. "The tea place." We met at a quiet cafe tucked between a flower shop and an antique store. The smell of chamomile hung in the air. Sienna was already there, sitting near the window, her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. She looked smaller than I remembered, her perfect posture softened by something heavier than guilt. When she saw me, she stood too quickly. "Thank you for coming," she said. I sat across from her. "You don't have to thank me. You're family." She swallowed hard. "I haven't felt like it for a long time." The rain tapped the window beside us. She reached into her purse and took out a folded napkin, then smoothed it flat on the table. Her eyes glistened. "I need to tell you the truth about that night. The wedding." I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence gives people the courage to speak. "It wasn't Grant's idea," she said. "Victor told him to say those words. He said it would make people see him as independent, as a man who'd risen above his roots. He said, 'Shame sells better than sentiment.'" She looked up, her eyes raw. "Grant didn't want to, not at first. But Victor told him that if he wanted the job, if he wanted me, he had to prove he wasn't tied to his past." My throat tightened. I had always suspected manipulation, but hearing it confirmed made the wound deeper, cleaner. "And you?" I asked softly. "You knew?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I did. I thought it would blow over, that people would forget. But they didn't. And when I saw your face that night, I realized I'd helped him trade truth for applause." I reached across the table, rested my hand over hers. Sometimes the hardest thing to forgive isn't what people do to us, but what we let happen beside us. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "I want to make it right," she whispered. Victor's lost everything, and Grant's trying to hold on to whatever's left. But I don't care about the money or the image anymore. I just want to help. I looked at her for a long time. Her apology wasn't a performance. It was weary, real. Then start by keeping this between us, I said. For 30 days. Her brows lifted. 30 days? Yes, that's how long it takes to test truth. If Grant chooses honesty on his own, he deserves the chance. If he doesn't, the truth will come without him. She nodded slowly. And if he fails? Then silence will speak for me again. She exhaled shakily. What should I do? I reached into my bag and pulled out an old paper knife, its handle worn smooth from years of use. I placed it on the table between us. Take this, I said. It belonged to my father. I use another now. You keep this one. She picked it up carefully, tracing the edge with her fingertip. Why give this to me? Because it's not a weapon, I said. It's a reminder. You can't cut corners and expect the book to hold. If you want to help Grant, start by cutting away what doesn't belong. Her eyes filled again, but this time there was steadiness behind the tears. I will, she said. I promise. The rain eased outside, the light shifting to gold. She glanced at the knife again, then looked at me. He's different lately, she said. Quieter. I think he's starting to see it. I sipped my tea. Then don't push. Let him learn what silence sounds like when it isn't punishment. She smiled faintly. You're a patient woman. I've had practice. We sat there for a while, saying nothing. The cafe hummed with soft conversation around us, cups clinking, chairs scraping the floor. Outside, a boy in a yellow raincoat splashed through puddles, laughing. Life always goes on, even when hearts are still catching up. When it was time to leave, Sienna stood and hugged me. It wasn't a quick or polite hug. It was the kind that says thank you for seeing me. If he changes, she said softly, I'll make sure he tells you himself. I'll be here, I said. She hesitated, then added, he still keeps the ruler you gave him when he was a kid. The wooden one. He told me he can't throw it away. I smiled. That's a start. After she left, I lingered by the window, watching the rain fade into mist. I thought about Grant as a boy, sitting beside me on the floor of this same workshop, his hands too small to hold a needle but eager to try. He once told me, I want to build things that don't fall apart. Somewhere along the way, he forgot what that meant. But forgetting isn't forever. That night, I walked home slowly, the city lights reflected in puddles, small ripples spreading out and disappearing. At home, I placed my tools neatly on the bench, each in its place, the ruler, the knife, the spool of waxed thread. I wrote in my notebook, forgiveness is not silence. It's the sound of someone trying again. When I closed the notebook, the room felt lighter. The rain had stopped completely, leaving a faint smell of pine in the air. I turned off the light, stood in the doorway, and whispered, 30 days. Somewhere across town, a young woman held a knife that wasn't meant to hurt, and a man she loved sat alone, wondering how to measure what he had broken. The news came on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside an email from Harper. The subject line read, Probation Notice, Grant Lawson. I opened it slowly, even though I already knew. When ambition is built on fragile seams, it eventually tears on its own. Grant's company had issued a formal notice. Performance review pending, bonus suspended, conduct under internal assessment. The words were polished, professional, and devastating in their simplicity. I read them twice, then printed the page and set it beside my coffee. The letters looked smaller on paper, like they were ashamed to exist. Around noon, the phone rang. His voice came through tight, brittle, the sound of pride unraveling. "They're cutting my bonus," he said. "Victor's out, and they're saying it's my fault." I stayed quiet for a beat. "Is it?" He exhaled, long and shaky. "They're saying I didn't meet expectations, that I drew attention to the wrong kind of publicity. Can you believe that? I worked for years to get here." "You worked for someone else's version of here," I said. "That's not the same thing." He didn't respond, and I could hear the faint echo of traffic behind him. "They're talking about changing the company's image again," he said bitterly. "New branding, new leadership. Victor called this morning. He wants me to distance myself from the Lawsons entirely. He says the name is poison now." I closed my eyes. "You already tried that once. How did it feel?" "Don't do this," he said. "I don't need another lecture." "I'm not giving you one," I said softly. "I'm giving you a chance to tell the truth." He laughed, but it broke halfway through. "Truth doesn't pay rent, Mom." "It pays peace," I said. "And that's worth more." There was a long silence. Then, quietly, he said, "They invited us on Victor's yacht this weekend. Lorraine wants to take photos, post something tasteful about resilience. Sienna doesn't want to go, but she doesn't want to upset him either." "And what do you want?" He hesitated. "I don't know." "Then don't go until you do," I said. "No decision made from confusion ever ends well." He sighed. "You make everything sound simple." "It's not simple," I said. "It's just clear." He didn't say goodbye, but I heard him breathe before hanging up. That breath was enough. Sometimes change begins with nothing more than the sound of someone remembering to breathe. That weekend, I worked late into the night, repairing a water-damaged ledger. The spine was warped, the glue weak. Every time I tried to straighten it too fast, the paper tore. So I slowed down, let it relax in the warmth, and pressed it gently until it held. Patience, I thought. Everything that bends too long needs time to find its shape again. Sunday evening, my phone buzzed. It was Sienna. Her message was simple. He didn't go. He told Victor he's done. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then came another message. He cried after. I've never seen him like that. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The sound that left me wasn't relief exactly, but something quieter. A kind of peace that doesn't need to be loud. The kind that means maybe, just maybe, something good is beginning. The next day, Grant came by. He looked tired but lighter. He didn't knock this time, just stepped inside. I told them I wouldn't change my name, he said. Victor called me ungrateful. Lorraine blocked my number. I think they're done with me. Good, I said. Now you can start being you. He smiled faintly. You make it sound like that's a job. It is, I said. The hardest one you'll ever have. He walked around the workshop, touching the spines of books, the jars of tools. I used to think this place was small, he said. Now it feels bigger than the offices I've been in. Perspective grows when pride shrinks, I said. He stopped at the workbench, picked up the ruler, and studied the engraved initials. I used to think you carved these letters just to remind yourself who you were. I did, I said. And to remind whoever came after me. He nodded slowly, running his thumb along the worn metal. You think it's too late to fix what I broke? Only if you stop trying. He looked up, eyes bright. If I wanted to help with the foundation, I interrupted gently. Don't offer from guilt. offer from clarity. He nodded again, a quiet promise forming behind his expression. I'll come back when I'm sure. After he left, I sat in the chair he'd just occupied. The air still carried the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive but fading fast. It made me think of all the ways people try to hide the smell of fear, with money, with polish, with words. But eventually, everything returns to its natural scent. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Humility doesn't erase you, it reveals you." The line came easily, like it had been waiting. Outside, the rain started again, light and rhythmic. I walked to the window and watched the city glow under the wet streetlights. My reflection stared back. Older, steadier, but not alone anymore. For the first time in years, I felt the space between us, mother and son, begin to close, thread by thread. Across town, Grant sat on his apartment floor with a cardboard box of old things. Inside was the wooden ruler I'd given him as a boy. He brushed off the dust, turned it in his hands, and whispered something no one could hear. But I didn't need to. I could feel it. Some lessons travel without sound. The invitations went out in thick cream envelopes stamped with a simple emblem, 2 hands crossing a line. The Lawson Hands Gala. The name felt too big for me, but Harper insisted it belonged to the work now, not the person. "You've spent your life restoring the spines of others," she said. "It's time you stand for your own." I smiled and told her I'd rather sit quietly in the back. She laughed. "You can sit in the back," she said, "but you'll still be seen." The city prepared for the event the way it prepares for any celebration. Too much polish, not enough purpose. But ours was different. The gala wasn't about chandeliers or champagne. It was about calloused hands and quiet pride. The venue was the old library, the one with floors that creaked like old ships. It seemed fitting. My father built vessels. I built bindings. Both were meant to keep stories afloat. I spent the week before the event buried in preparations. Darnell handled logistics. Tommy practiced his speech. Harper finalized the donor disclosures. And I made one final decision. Grant would be invited, but only under one condition. His invitation read, "Please attend under the name given to you at birth." I sealed the envelope and pressed my thumb to the wax. There was no anger in it, only intention. The night arrived wrapped in winter air. I wore a simple navy dress and a thin silver bracelet that had once been my mother's. Harper met me at the entrance, her clipboard in hand, her expression a mix of focus and quiet pride. "The mayor's here," she said. "And the press. You sure you still want to stay off the stage?" "I'm sure," I said. "Tonight isn't about faces, it's about names." Inside, the hall glowed with warm light. Tables were set with small brass plaques, each engraved with the name of a local craftsman. Carpenters, printers, mechanics, bookbinders, all gathered in one place, their laughter carrying more honesty than any I'd heard in years. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and lemon oil. It smelled like work. I stood near the back, unnoticed, watching Darnell open the evening with a speech about the dignity of labor. His voice filled the room, deep and sure. "We live in a world that praises the result and forgets the maker," he said. "But every beam, every page, every honest thing you touch begins with a pair of hands. The Lawson Hands Foundation isn't charity, it's acknowledgement." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was proud. I caught sight of Grant near the doorway. He looked uncertain, as though he had wandered into a place that still remembered him. Sienna stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. When our eyes met across the room, he nodded once. No smile, no words, just acknowledgement. That was enough. Lorraine was there too, seated at the front with her usual poise, her phone resting on the table like a weapon. She didn't see me. She was waiting for something, or someone, to give her a reason to post. I almost pitied her. Almost. The mayor took the stage next, praising community programs and resilience. His speech was careful, rehearsed, but genuine enough. Then he announced, "Tonight, we honor the hands that build, the names that last." His gesture pointed to the main banner above the stage. Honor the name. The same words my father had written in his will. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Harper caught my eye and smiled. She had planned that detail. When the lights dimmed for the presentation video, the screen filled with images, close-ups of thread being pulled through paper, of wood being planed, of welders' sparks flying in slow motion. My workshop appeared briefly, a pair of hands tying off a stitch. No face, just movement. The narrator's voice said, "Some names aren't inherited. They're earned, one line at a time." The audience fell quiet. Even Lorraine's phone lowered. During the intermission, Harper approached me with a small envelope. "It's from Cole," she said. "He's sitting by the sound booth. He wanted you to see this before the night's over." Inside was a clipping from a business journal, Pierce Holdings files for bankruptcy protection. I looked up and caught Cole's eye across the room. He simply tipped his head, no triumph in it, only closure. "Poetic justice," Harper murmured. "Quiet justice," I corrected. As the second half of the gala began, I stepped into the hallway to breathe. The night air was cool, the sound of laughter spilling faintly from inside. I looked down the corridor and saw Grant walking toward me. His hands were in his pockets, his eyes clear but unsure. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said. "Neither was I," he replied. But Sienna reminded me that pride can only hurt you if you keep feeding it. I smiled faintly. "She's a wise woman." "She is," he said. "And she told me something you once told her, about cutting away what doesn't belong." "She listened," I said softly. He nodded. "I'm trying to do the same." We stood there in silence, the distance between us finally still. After a while, he said, "I want to make things right, Mom. Not with words, with work." "Then start tomorrow," I said. "The foundation can always use an extra pair of hands." He smiled. A small one, but real. "Deal." From inside, Darnell's voice echoed, announcing the next honoree. Harper waved to me from the stage, a signal. I nodded to Grant. "Go inside," I said. "You'll want to see this part." He went, disappearing into the light. I stayed in the hallway, listening. The applause grew louder, then softened as the mayor called my father's name. Ben Lawson, shipwright. The man whose legacy taught us that straight lines are not just for wood, but for character. The crowd rose to its feet. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, Lorraine was being escorted out by security. She had tried to record the speech for her followers, but the event policy banned all live streams. Her protest echoed briefly, then faded. A fitting symmetry, I thought. Once, she had broadcast my humiliation. Now she carried her own. I walked back inside as the audience stood in ovation for the craftspeople on stage. The light glowed against the brass plaques, and for a moment, it looked like every name there was shining. I found my seat in the back and whispered to myself, "We're home, Dad." The name made it. The hall was quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels like breath held between heartbeats. Darnell's voice faded as he stepped down from the podium, and for a moment, the stage lights hovered over an empty microphone. Then Harper approached it, her heels soft against the old wood floor. She glanced toward me where I sat in the back row and gave the smallest nod. I nodded back. The moment had arrived, and even though my name was not on the program, I could feel the weight of my father's will pressing gently in the air. Harper spoke first about the foundation, about the hands that built the city and the dignity that often went unseen. "This isn't a night about charity," she said. "It's about recognition. The value of honest work is not measured by applause, but by endurance." She paused, scanning the crowd. "Tonight, we celebrate that endurance." Then the screen behind her flickered to life again. I hadn't known she'd added another segment. It began with the sound of waves and the creak of wood. My father's shipyard appeared, the brass plaque glinting in the morning sun. The camera panned slowly to a small workshop filled with books, tools, and light falling through a window. My window. Hand stitched a spine closed, then pressed a steel ruler against the leather. My initials flashed briefly, LL, before the scene faded to black. The voiceover said simply, "Some names are not given, they're kept." A hush spread through the room. Then Harper spoke again, her voice low but steady. "Our anonymous founder asked that this night remain focused on others. But sometimes, silence hides the wrong kind of secret. So tonight, we name her." She gestured toward me. "Lila Lawson, the daughter of a shipwright, the keeper of a craft, the woman who rebuilt a name without ever raising her voice." I didn't stand right away. The applause began softly, then grew, filling every corner of the room. I rose slowly, the sound washing over me like tide water. Faces turned, some surprised, some tearful, some simply in awe that a quiet life could make such noise. I saw Sienna smiling through her tears, her hand on Grant's arm. And Grant, he wasn't clapping at first. He just looked at me, frozen, until his hands finally joined the sound, slow and deliberate. I stepped onto the stage, not for the spotlight, but for closure. Harper handed me the microphone. I could feel its weight, heavy with 1,000 unsaid things. I looked at the audience, then at the craftspeople who had become the true heirs of my father's legacy. My voice was calm when it came. "My father built ships with his hands," I began. "He believed every line mattered. The ones you draw, the ones you cross, the ones you stand behind. He used to say, 'If it isn't straight, it isn't honest.'" I paused, letting the quiet return. "I've spent my life binding books, mending what was torn. Tonight, I realize he was teaching me how to bind people too." The lights dimmed slightly, soft gold spilling across the faces in front of me. "We don't inherit pride through money," I said. "We inherit it through work, through the care we put into what bears our name. And when that name is tarnished, we don't erase it. We restore it." I felt my throat tighten. I looked toward Grant, who stood now, his eyes glistening. "A good spine," I continued, "doesn't stay strong because it was never bent. It stays strong because it was repaired with love." The audience was silent again. In that stillness, the truth found its shape. I glanced at the back of the hall, where a brass plaque leaned against a velvet cloth. "Ben Lawson, shipwright." The words beneath it read, "Honor the name." I smiled. "My father taught me that silence is not weakness," I said. "It's preparation. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stand straight when the world leans." There was no music cue, no grand finale. I stepped back from the microphone and set it gently on the stand. For 3 long seconds, there was nothing but stillness. Then the room erupted. Applause thundered against the walls. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears. Even Harper blinked, hard behind her glasses. And in the middle of it all, I saw Grant. He was crying openly now, his hands still pressed together as if praying. Sienna leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear. He nodded, eyes locked on me, his mouth shaping a single word I didn't need to read to understand. Sorry. The applause swelled again, but I didn't move. I let it flow past me like wind through trees. I closed my eyes, and for the briefest moment, I could hear my father's laugh, low, rough, full of pride. Keep it straight, he used to say, and I had. Through silence, through patience, through work. When I opened my eyes, Harper was beside me, guiding me gently down the stage steps. You did it, she whispered. No, I said quietly. We did. As we reached the back of the hall, a ripple of commotion broke near the entrance. Lorraine Pierce, dressed in sequins and fury, had stood up to film again. A security guard moved quickly, hand raised. Her protest rose above the crowd for only a second before the guard took her phone and escorted her toward the door. The applause swallowed her voice whole. I almost smiled, not from spite, but from balance. The world was realigning itself. The music began, soft strings, tender but firm. People mingled, laughed, cried. The craftspeople shook hands, and the mayor raised a toast to labor and legacy. I slipped away quietly to the side corridor, the noise fading behind me. My pulse slowed. The light was softer there, golden and forgiving. I stood alone for a while, looking at my hands, the same hands that had once trembled under humiliation, that had now built something far steadier than revenge. They weren't smooth. They were lined with age and glue and wax. But they were honest, and that was enough. When I finally stepped outside, the night air met me like an old friend. The rain had stopped. The city was quiet, glowing faintly beneath the street lamps. I took a deep breath, tasting the salt of distant ocean air, and whispered, "We did it, Dad. The name stands." Behind me, the sound of applause rose once more, carried faintly through the closing doors, less like celebration, more like a promise that dignity, once lost, could always be found again. The morning after the gala, sunlight slipped through my curtains, landing on the workbench where I'd left my father's ruler the night before. The room still smelled faintly of beeswax and old paper. For the first time in months, the silence felt gentle, not heavy. I poured coffee, sat down, and opened my notebook. The page stared back at me, waiting. I wrote one sentence. Some endings begin with forgiveness. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Grant stood there, holding an envelope in his hand. He looked like a man walking through the last shadow of pride. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his face pale but open. Sienna stood a few steps behind him, her eyes soft with hope and worry. He handed me the envelope. "It came from Harper," he said. "She said you should be here when I read it." I nodded and stepped aside. He sat at the table while I poured tea, the same way I used to when he was a boy practicing cursive he never liked. He turned the envelope in his hands a few times before opening it. The paper inside was thick, the handwriting unmistakable. "My father's. To my grandson," it began. "If this letter finds you, then so has the truth. You cannot inherit a name you've buried. A man's worth is not measured by what he gains, but by what he repairs. The money will be there, waiting, but only for a man who has learned what his hands can do besides reaching out for more? Grant's throat moved as he swallowed hard. Sienna's hand found his. He kept reading. For 1 year, you will work under the Lawson Hands Foundation, not as its heir, but as its apprentice. You will serve the community you once turned from. You will build, teach, carry, repair, whatever needs doing. When the year is done, you may reclaim what bears your name. Until then, you are to earn it the way our family always has, with your hands. He looked up at me. Is this real? Yes, I said. It's as real as the humiliation you gave me, and as real as the silence I kept afterward. He made sure redemption was part of the inheritance. Grant's hands trembled slightly. He planned this all along. He trusted that one day you'd understand why. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes wet. I don't know if I can do it. You can, I said, but only if you stop trying to be perfect. Redemption isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. Sienna's voice broke the quiet. I'll help him, she said softly. We'll do it together. I smiled. Then sign it together. Harper arrived not long after, papers in hand. She placed them on the table with quiet precision. This is the official agreement, she said. A 1-year commitment to the Lawson Hands Foundation, signed by both Grant and Sienna, witnessed by Lila and myself. She looked at Grant gently. It's not punishment, Mr. Lawson. It's purpose. Grant read every line, then picked up the pen. He paused halfway through, looked at me and said, I don't deserve this chance. No, I said. You don't. But you can earn it. He nodded and signed. Then he passed the pen to Sienna. She signed too, her signature steady and sure. When it was done, Harper slipped the document into a folder and tapped it lightly. Consider it sealed, she said. The air in the room shifted. Something invisible, but heavy, lifted. I poured another cup of tea for each of us. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the kettle cooling. Then Grant said, Mom, I'm sorry. It was the simplest sentence he'd ever said to me, and the truest. I didn't rush to answer. I just reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His grip was hesitant, then firm. You're forgiven, I said. Not because you asked, because I'm tired of carrying what isn't mine. Tears welled in his eyes. I'll make it right. I know, I said. You already started the moment you walked in. Harper gathered her folders and stood. I'll leave you both to it, she said. At the door, she turned and added, For what it's worth, Ben Lawson would have been proud of this morning. After she left, the house fell into a stillness that felt like peace. Sienna rose, pressed a kiss on my cheek, and whispered, Thank you. Then she went to wait in the car, leaving me and Grant alone. He looked around the workshop, eyes tracing every detail, the books, the tools, the ruler resting in the sunlight. It's beautiful here, he said. I never really saw it before. You weren't looking, I said. Now you will. He smiled through the tears. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, I said. Darnell will meet you at the community center. Wear something you can stain. He laughed softly, wiped his eyes, and stood. At the door, he turned back. Mom, if Grandpa were here, what would he say? I thought for a moment. He'd tell you to measure twice before speaking once. Grant chuckled. Then I'll keep that ruler close. When he was gone, I sat down and opened my notebook again. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote. Forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's the start of another kind of work. I looked at the ruler on the table, its edge shining in the morning light. My reflection stared back, faint but steady. Outside, I could hear the sound of an engine starting, then fading down the street. The air felt lighter, the kind of light that comes only after a storm has finally run out of thunder. I whispered to the empty room, "He's on his way, Dad." And somewhere in the silence that followed, I could almost hear the creak of a ship leaving harbor, its sails full, its course straight. The year began with winter light stretched thin across the workshop windows. Grant showed up the first morning in an old jacket, the same one he'd worn in college, sleeves rolled too short. He looked awkward but determined, like a man stepping into a life that didn't yet fit. Darnell met him outside with a firm handshake and a quiet grin. "Welcome to the real work," he said. "No podiums here, son, just hands." I stood by the doorway, watching. The smell of glue and oak filled the air. Grant rolled up his sleeves, and for the first time in years, I saw his wrists marked with small scratches and ink stains. They looked right on him. The first month was slow. He learned to cut paper cleanly, to measure before folding, to wax thread until it hummed through the needle. He ruined his first spine by pulling too tight. I didn't scold him. I simply handed him another. "Start again," I said. "Mistakes are proof that you're touching the truth." By spring, the foundation had grown. The workshops buzzed with new apprentices. Tommy became Grant's shadow, teaching him how to balance precision with patience. "You can't rush wax," Tommy told him once, laughing. Grant smiled back and nodded. Humility had finally found him. I visited often but stayed in the background, letting him build his rhythm. Sienna joined some weekends, helping organize donation drives. She carried the quiet joy of someone who'd stopped pretending. Sometimes, when they thought I wasn't looking, I caught them laughing together. No filters, no angles, just light. The newspapers called Grant's transformation the quiet comeback, though he never granted interviews. He didn't need to. His work spoke in edges smoothed, bindings straightened, and books reborn under his hands. People began to ask for the younger Lawson by name, and he always corrected them gently. "Just Grant. The name belongs to everyone who works for it." Summer came with the smell of salt and warm wind. Harper drove us to Camden to visit May. The house looked the same. Peeling paint, wildflowers by the fence. When we arrived, May stood on the porch, her hands folded over her heart. "You brought him home," she said, tears glinting. "I told you the name would find its way." We spent the afternoon by the harbor, the waves slapping gently against the docks. Grant helped Tommy install a new brass plaque beside the old one. The engraving read, "Ben Lawson, Shipwright." His line continues. When the screws tightened, the sun hit the metal, and for a moment, it looked like fire. May touched the plaque and whispered, "The name's home again." Later, we sat by the water eating sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. The air smelled of pine and sea. Grant threw crumbs to the gulls, his expression calm. "I used to think legacy was about keeping something alive," he said. "Now I think it's about keeping it honest." I nodded, pride swelling like the tide. When autumn came, Victor's company was long gone, its name dissolved, its offices empty. Lorraine sent a brief letter, part apology, part excuse. "I hope you find peace in your work," she wrote. I left it unopened on the table for a week, then filed it away. Time answers better than words. Grant worked through every season. Winter's chill didn't stop him. Neither did the summer heat. By December, his hands had changed. Tougher, steadier, no longer the hands of a man who measured worth in currency. He led a new training program for at-risk youth, teaching them to restore books and furniture. Watching him instruct others with patience I once begged him to have was the closest thing to grace I'd ever seen. One evening, near year's end, he came by after everyone had left. The workshop was dim, lit only by a single lamp. "Tomorrow's my last day," he said. "The clause ends. Harper's preparing the paperwork." I looked up from my bench. "And how do you feel?" He smiled faintly, like I finally understand what Grandpa meant. "You can't inherit a name you've buried. You have to dig it out yourself." I handed him a cloth to wipe the dust from his hands. "Then you're ready." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you forgive me completely?" I thought for a moment. Forgiveness isn't complete, Grant. It's continuous. It lives in how we treat each other tomorrow. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep earning it." Before he left, he set a small package on the bench. Inside was a handmade book bound in navy cloth, the same shade as the sea off Camden. On the first page, he had written, "For my mother, who taught me that silence isn't empty, it's full of work." I traced the letters and closed the cover gently. The spine was perfect. The next morning, we returned to the harbor together. The air was cold, the sky clear. The plaque shone under the winter light. We stood there without speaking. The sea was calm, steady, infinite. I slipped the ruler from my bag, the old steel one with my initials, and pressed it into his hands. "You'll need this," I said. He looked down at it, eyes wide. "Mom, this is yours." "It was never mine," I said. "It's the family's. It measures more than inches." He nodded, holding it close. "I'll keep it straight." May joined us with 2 mugs of coffee. "He looks like Ben did the year he built his first ship," she said. "Same hands, same stubborn calm." I smiled. "Then we've done something right." That night, back in Portland, I sat at my desk, the house quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Work teaches humility, humility teaches grace, and grace brings the name home." I closed the book and placed it beside the lamp. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to measure anything. Some lines don't need rulers, they stand straight on their own. The morning was bright and still, the kind of winter light that makes everything look honest. I woke early, made coffee, and opened the windows of the workshop. The air was cold enough to bite, but clean. On the table lay the final document from Harper, a simple confirmation that Grant had fulfilled every condition of my father's clause. No fanfare, no ceremony, just one final line in neat type. Clause satisfied. Estate restored. At 9, I heard the bell over the door. Grant stepped inside, his jacket dusted with frost, his hands red from the cold. Sienna followed, holding a bundle wrapped in a pale blue blanket. They both looked tired but radiant, like people who'd been somewhere dark and found their way out together. I smiled. "So," I said softly, "you finished the year." He nodded. "I did. Darnell signed off yesterday. We rebuilt the reading room at the community center. Tommy and I installed the final shelves." "And how does it feel?" He looked around the workshop, his eyes landing on the books, the thread, the tools. "Quiet," he said. "In a good way." Sienna stepped forward, her eyes bright. "We wanted you to meet someone." She opened the blanket slightly, revealing a sleeping baby, soft and perfect. "This is Ben Sutter Lawson." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed, my chest ached. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling against the fabric. "You named him after both of them." Grant said. Grandpa Ben. And you. Sutter was your mother's maiden name. We thought, it fits. I reached out and touched the baby's hand. His skin was warm, impossibly small. He has strong fingers, I whispered. He'll build things one day. Sienna smiled. That's the plan. Grant set the infant carrier on the table, right beside the old ruler. The sight of them together, the future beside the measure of the past, made something settle deep inside me. Balance, continuity, grace. I have something for you, I said, reaching under the bench. Wrapped in linen was the steel ruler, newly polished but still marked with time. You earned this. He shook his head. Mom, it's yours. I pressed it into his hands. No, I said. It's ours. You've kept it straight. Now keep it moving. He looked down at it, tracing the initials. LL, he said quietly. Someday he'll ask what that means. Tell him it stands for keeping your line true, I said. And for Lawson, of course. He smiled. I'll tell him both. We spent the morning together. Sienna made tea, I rocked the baby, Grant fixed a loose hinge on the window. It was simple, domestic, and achingly peaceful. Every sound, the kettle whistle, the baby's soft breath, the scrape of the chair, felt like music made by forgiveness. When Harper arrived, she brought a small box. Inside was the Foundation's annual report, printed and bound. On the cover, Lawson hands, 1 year of honest work. She handed it to me with a grin. You should see the numbers, she said. You've started something that won't stop. I handed the report to Grant. It's yours now, I said. Run it the way it began, quietly. He nodded. I will. Tommy stopped by just before lunch, carrying a wrapped package. It's from all of us, he said, placing it in front of me. Inside was a handmade book bound in deep green leather, the title embossed in gold. Straight lines. The dedication read, To Lila Lawson, who taught us that silence builds stronger walls than pride ever could. I couldn't hold back the tears this time. I closed the book and held it to my chest. Thank you, I whispered, for keeping it straight. Grant watched me, then stepped closer. Mom, he said softly, there's one last thing. He picked up a small hammer and a brass stamp from the table. Together, we pressed the letters into a fresh piece of leather, Lawson. The sound echoed through the workshop, steady, deliberate, final. The letters gleamed under the light. That, I said quietly, is the sound of pride pressing back. He smiled. You used to say that when I was little. I still mean it. As the afternoon faded, they packed up to leave. Sienna kissed my cheek. We'll visit next week, she said, and bring the baby's first book. I'll have one ready, I said, bound strong. When they were gone, I sat by the window, the ruler's reflection catching the last of the sun. The workshop smelled of cedar and tea. I opened my notebook for the final time and wrote, Legacy isn't something you leave behind. It's something you pass on, one steady hand at a time. I closed the book, placed it on the shelf beside my father's plaque, and looked around the room. Every object had a story, every scar on the table a memory. I touched the ruler one last time and whispered, It's straight, Dad. It's home. Outside, the evening settled over Portland in gold and blue. The sound of the city softened, and from somewhere distant came the low hum of a ship horn drifting across the water. I smiled. Some lines, once drawn true, never fade. If you've been with me this far, thank you for listening. Maybe my story reminds you of your own, of something you've built or someone you've forgiven. I hope you'll stay for the next one. Because in every silence, there's another story waiting to stand tall.